Entrando em contato com o atendimento ao cliente... Para muitas pessoas é um jeito fácil de arruinar um bom dia, mas na Zendesk nós deixamos a experiência do cliente melhor. Melhor para sua avó, melhor para o seu vendedor preferido de flores, melhor para o cara do apartamento 3A, melhor para você, melhor para todos. Porque enquanto alguns dizem que o cliente sempre tem razão, nós dizemos que o cliente é sempre humano. E como seres humanos, queremos fazer algo melhor para todos nós. Zendesk, experiência do cliente com IA desenvolvida para humanos.
Gosta de escutar podcasts para aprender a se cuidar melhor? Então aproveite essa pausa para escutar seu corpo e cuidar da sua saúde. Com o novo Galaxy Ring, é possível monitorar seu coração, acompanhar a qualidade do seu sono e entender sua pontuação de energia o tempo todo. Acesse samsung.com.br e saiba mais. Seu corpo fala, a Samsung traduz. Galaxy AI chegou.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge, who was very poorly last week because you had COVID and it turns out you still have.
I do. It's the first time I've had it too, and it's just going, you know what, I'm going to hang around for the full 10 days just to kind of make up for not getting you before.
So listeners, you can't see this, but Stuart's not in his normal office because you are in isolation in your bedroom. Is that right?
I am. Well, last year a bunch of my family got COVID, and so this year I'm determined not to give it to anyone else if I can help it. So yeah, I've been living like a sort of like a monk in my bedroom for the last week and a half.
But it's an insight though into your house. I can see just behind you there's racks of CDs. Which what sort of era of CD? Are they all albums or are they singles?
There's quite a lot of singles. So when I was a student journalist in the mid-90s, so I got sent a lot of CD singles and that. So I got, you know, even the Britpop bands that no one remembers, not even you. I think I probably got their CD singles. And yeah, a lot of albums. But we I'd like, what do you do with your CDs? Because, you know, I stream things now, but they look quite nice when you put them in a sort of rack, don't they? So it's really decorative rather than functional.
All I'm thinking is that is an absolute Woolworths bargain bin of Britpop singles, which are stacked behind you. Anyway, yeah, Stuart came down with COVID. I've subsequently come down with a rather nasty traditional headachy cold, but we are back. That's why we weren't here last week, but we're back because we didn't want to leave you hanging for another week. So we're going to attempt to cough and splutter our way through this one. I expect much action with the mute button in the next half an hour. But we wanted to bring you this because we haven't done one of these episodes for ages. It's one of our listeners' questions specials. Thanks to everyone who's been in touch. Keep your questions coming. We'll give you the email address at the end of the show. Where should we start? Here's a question from Ian McKinnon. On Wikipedia, you can see what the budget was and what the box office return was for a lot of movies. The figures are often quite precise rather than rough estimates, which would indicate this information is publicly available. It got me wondering whether the same information is available for music, specifically the cost of albums. Now, as far as I know, it's not generally something which the music industry go in for, and I don't think there may be a list on the internet somewhere of albums, which I think you've been looking up albums, the most expensive albums of all time. But in general, it seems movie makers aren't so secretive about their budgets and just seem happier to show off how much money they've spent on their latest blockbuster. But not the music industry, though, in general, I don't think, Stuart.
No, it's not released as a matter of course. And you have in the movie industry all these tables, box office takings and cost of budgets. The one thing Wikipedia is good at, there is actually a Wikipedia page for the most expensive albums ever. And what it's good at is it rounds up reports from the past. So where basically someone at some point is giving an interview saying, yeah, the budget for that album was this. We spent that much marketing that album. And it kind of aggregates that and then kind of figures out what it's worth nowadays with inflation. So I've been digging down that rabbit hole.
Well, you see, this is the thing, that sometimes there are headline figures for particular albums, but in general, I think there are probably two reasons why the amount of money that was spent on an album becomes public. And particularly there's one where the music industry are very keen to tell you when they've made a terrific massive, big selling album for a very small amount of money. And then on the other side, you have journalists who are very keen to tell you how much money the music industry have wasted on an absolute howler. So two examples. So Nirvana's album, I think the stats are out there, or the figures are out there for Nevermind, which was done on a budget which, for the time, I know this sounds like a lot of money. The budget for Nevermind was $65,000. Which, as I say, might sound like a lot of money these days to some musicians, but not compared to other albums which were being recorded at the time. 65k was pretty tight, and they famously, I think, only had £5,000 to make the Smells Like Teen Spirit video. And then on the other hand, just fast forward a year after that, a year later, Factory Records gave Happy Mondays a maximum budget of £150,000 to make what turned out to be the album Yes Please. Although, if you're familiar with the Happy Mondays, some of you will know they did spend rather a lot of that money attempting and failing to make the record in Barbados. And the album reportedly ended up costing somewhere in the region of £380,000, which is eye-watering now. But that's not, I don't think, one of the costliest albums of all time, given your research.
No, it's not. So, I mean, a lot of this is from a certain era, which is kind of the mid-90s height of CD. But yeah, so I don't think it'll be a surprise to many people. The most expensive album recorded cost ever was Michael Jackson's Invincible, which took, I think, 4 years to record. So it came out in 2001. And that was $30 to $40 million at the time, which, if you adjust for inflation now, is sort of $51 million to $68 million.
Wow.
And then there's this, he's got 3 of the top 5, so History and Dangerous, which are not like, the later Michael Jackson albums. The budgets seem to just balloon. Guns N' Roses' Chinese Democracy is number 2, which I think there's a function of how long that took. And there's like a little column in this table that's like when it was recorded, and it's like 1998 to 2007. So, like, if you have that, I mean, that was a famous program, like re-recording and going back in, scrapping things. And so that was about thing. But number 5 surprised me. So what do you think the 5th, this is a really horrible question. What do you think the 5th most expensive album ever is?
What sort of era are we talking? 80s, 90s?
We're talking, it came out in 2001.
Oh, came out in 2001.
Yeah.
I don't think I was listening to many big albums in 2001 because I just had the Strokes EP on repeat probably by that point.
I don't think you were listening to this one, it's fair to say.
What was it?
Victoria Beckham by Victoria Beckham.
Are you joking? Really?
5 million quid apparently, which adjusted for inflation is like 10.4 million. And for that price, I want for the obvious calculation, for that price, you could have recorded AC/DC's For Those About to Rock, We Salute You, Fleetwood Mac's Tusk, and Metallica's Metallica. So
dear,
money well spent.
Dear the record industry, what on earth were you thinking? I mean, this is one of the reasons why no one really wants to go public on the insanity of these figures and what happens. And, there will be artists who are demanding astonishing amounts of money, or at least there were at that point, to make an album. And no one wants to tell you how much money an LP has cost, particularly in the run-up to the release, because most people will be then doing their own sums thinking, well, how many copies will they need to sell to break even? And it'll turn out to be, with a Victoria Beckham out. Who knows? But you'll have to go triple platinum to get anywhere close to recouping. And so I think that's one of the things. There's an embarrassment factor. I'll tell you the other thing, which off the back of that, which I think may also come into play, is just musicians' jealousy. Because there is a reason a lot of these figures possibly are kept private, because if you've got a roster of artists, or even if you're looking across at another label, say you're band A, and you're negotiating how much time you can spend in the studio and what sort of studio you can afford to record in and who's going to produce it and how much you're going to pay the producer. If somebody comes back these days and says, you've got £20,000 to play with, and then you're out on tour somewhere or you bump into someone from another band, and band B have been given £50,000, either by the same label or a rival label, then there's gonna be irate phone calls to the record label as to why aren't we getting the sort of attention that this other band is. So I think
the other
that's
thing,
part of it.
yeah, and the other thing to say is we're talking about just recording costs so far, but there's a separate chart on Wikipedia of promotional costs. So once you get to actually marketing it, and to give you an idea, Michael Jackson's history, this reckons it cost $10 million to make, but $30 million to promote. That was the marketing budget. Which was that the one where he floated a giant statue down the Thames of himself, or was that a different album? But like, this is where you spend the money.
You should know by now. I think you might be asking the wrong man when it comes to Michael Jackson trivia.
But it's weird. Like it feels like, for a couple of reasons, I was thinking about those days are gone, because I think now, budgets have shrunk on both sides, marketing budgets, but also in terms of making music. I think when you're recording a new album, there's a lot of work you do before you go into an expensive studio, whether it's kind of preparing the beats so I think it's probably quite hard for anyone to ever match any of those costs. Even the biggest stars, so like thinking about, I don't know, the Drakes of this world, the Weekends, like the cost of making a Drake album now will be a lot less, I think, comparatively, than some of those big 80s and 90s rock or pop albums, because just the technology has changed. So my favorite anecdote I read about cheap albums was Black Sabbath. Have you heard this one? How much they got to make Black Sabbath, their debut album?
I don't know.
They got £1,000, but each member used £100 to pay off their debts. So they had £600 left to make the album, and the rest is sludge metal history.
Right.
So £600.
I hope that sort of at least gives you the background as to why some of these figures aren't readily available. And I kind of think that given how the music industry operates, I don't expect we'll see any more transparency anytime soon. Question from Jack Wormsley. I was wondering if you'd be able to explain the rights performers have to remuneration under UK laws. I understand that performers have a right to equitable remuneration when a commercially published sound recording of music is played in public. Does this mean, though, that every time music is played in public, any session musicians who performed on the track are due a fee? Because what if they did something minuscule, like they played one note or only sung one word? This might be one for you, Stuart. We sort of touched on this a little bit before, but performers' payments, and in this case, particularly session musicians.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to basics, there are two types of performers, aren't there? So there's featured and non-featured. So featured performers are the ones who are credited on the record release, the artists. And non-featured artists are the session musicians, where the backing vocals or session musicians. And as far as I understand it, though, they're generally paid on a work for hire basis, so they'll get paid a fee, won't they, for going into the studio and doing the work. And to step up to being a featured artist, maybe if you're a guest collaborator, if you've done something, if you've come in and played a guitar solo, talking of the great Michael Jackson days when he got Slash in, Slash was a featured artist when he did a guitar solo for Michael Jackson. And so when you get into things like equitable remuneration and performance, it's equitable. So the featured artist will get, I believe it's 50% of the royalties from the song being played on the radio in public, via Collecting Society PPL. So it's very much about whether you are a featured artist, will you earn ongoing royalties. But is that right? I mean, that's my understanding.
Session musicians, as you say, I think particularly they are guitars for hire. So they come in, they play the guitar. Well, we need someone to play sax on this particular track. You will be contacted and say, can you come and play sax on this song? And we will pay you X amount of money. There is a brilliant story, isn't there? And I can't remember for the life of me now whether it was Rick Wakeman or Elton John, but one of them was skint and bumped into Mark Bolan, who said, I'm recording some tracks in the studio tomorrow, come down. And they went and did literally like one piano line. And Mark Bolan said, right, we'll put you on the session payments, here's £50. And off they went. But obviously they wouldn't be paid in perpetuity every time that particular single gets played. But yes, unless you are, I guess, quite famous, I'm sort of speculating here whether the top of the range session musicians can negotiate their own split then, which I suppose, and particularly if you are, say, in the hip hop community, if you are bringing something to the song which will help sell the song, then you will want a part of that one. It's like support bands saying, we'll come on your tour, but we need a decent fee because we know we're of a stature that will help you sell the tickets.
Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
Vamos fazer diferente nessa ceia? Que tal um churrasco especial? Então escolha seus cortes maturata favoritos e prepare a grelha, porque o som é por nossa conta. Escute a playlist Celebra da Família e celebre cada momento em grande estilo. Maturata é churrasco e ponto.
It's all a negotiation, really, I think. And at the same point, if someone comes into studio to play sax and does something that the artist feels has kind of helped the song become better, they might give them, a songwriting credit. They might say, look, actually, your contribution is more than just coming in and playing the notes. So it's all to do with relationships, people, I think, as well. But yeah, and then this is I won't get into this whole debate again, but when we talk about whether streaming should be paid a bit more like radio, this is what people are talking about. Should 50% of the money from streaming go to the artists directly rather than via their labels and publishers? So that's the whole debate there.
Question from David Reed. A few years ago, we seemed to have a lot of contemporary songs in adverts, but this seems to have shifted again to classic 60s, 70s and 80s songs. What do artists typically get paid for the use of their music in adverts? This, I'm afraid, David, I think this might be one of those how long is a piece of string questions. And also, again, this alludes back to what we were saying about the money spent on records. I think, there was quite a lot of money flowing around during the 90s, and you could get yourself £40,000 for a fizzy drink TV advert for a sample of your track being used on that. I don't know what the figure is these days. Have you got anything on this, Stuart?
I mean, literally, how long's a piece of string? I mean, it's always negotiated. That's the main thing to say. So if you are a brand, a company, and you want to license someone's music, you have to say, right, we want to use this, and you have to get permission, you have to pay them what they ask for or agree it. So it's always a negotiation, and it will depend on what the advert's for, where you're going to use it, how big the campaign is, how prominent the song is, how in demand a song is, and whether the people license. I mean, if you want to go and get a Beatles song, the Beatles don't. So, I mean, there's a really good case study that I read actually in the research for this. So famously, Microsoft paid the Rolling Stones a reported $3 million to use Start Me Up for their Windows 95 ads back in 1995. And one of the guys who worked on that for Microsoft written this blog post. So you can find it if you search for Brad Chase Start Me Up. You can find this kind of horse's mouth blog post on the process of persuading the Stones to license this song for this campaign and how they initially wanted $10 million in a sponsorship of their tour, and they had to kind of turn them down, negotiate. And all the while, this advert was being created with the song in the hope they'd get the deal done by the end.
Right.
So it really is, if someone wants to play hardball, you have to kind of negotiate with them. But like I say, at the kind of the less superstar end of the market, I think it is the tens of thousands. And nowadays, of course, it's not just adverts on TV. It's brands doing social posts. Brands doing ads on Instagram. If they want to use music, they have to license that too. But that is smaller than TV.
Mm-hmm. And the deals, as I understand it, there will be a deal signed for a length of time. And then if the company using the advert decides that they're going to extend the run of the advert, then you renegotiate and you get a second or even third payment. As I remember it, that's what happened with Eat My Goal, Collapsed Lungs. Eat My Goal it was used by Coca-Cola, and then Coca-Cola extended the contract. So there was an additional payment once again, but not in the millions of pounds, I will hasten to add. That's why Collapsed Lung are not all living in mansions around the edges, the outskirts of the M25. But there was Billy Childish recorded a version of the Dad's Army theme. Do you remember that? And that was used in an advert. And so they got paid a bit of money for that. And then again, whoever was using the advert extended the contract, and they were making a reasonable for Billy Childish. here's however much it is. Let's just say it's 10 grand or something. And here's another 10 grand. And then I think they posted somewhere a picture of the cassette which he'd recorded the original on. It had cost absolutely, peanuts to make, but just it captures the imagination. It's interesting. I mean, we should get into the whole adverts and syncing music for adverts. As to how does that work for an artist? How do you get your music on an advert because it's handy income? And what are the advertisers looking for?
The other thing about sync deals is obviously the money is paid to your rights holders, the label and publishers. So how much money the artist makes depends on the deal they have with those, like anything else. But there are some good tales, like you say, from that time when they were big money. So I was reading about the Dandy Warhols and when Vodafone used Bohemian Like You in a really prominent ad campaign. And there was an interview with Courtney Taylor from the band when he said, I think he got about $1.5 million because he's a songwriter too. Right. And he used that money to buy a quarter of a city block in Portland where they live and turned it into a recording studio and film editing complex and kind of basically made the band self-sustainable. So the reason they can kind of carry on recording albums now is because they put this money they made from sync back in the day into a place to make the music. So there's a lot of stories like that, I think, from that time of artists getting money and then investing it wisely or not so wisely in other cases, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay, Philip Landvo, and I probably mispronounced your name, Philip. I apologise if I have. But Philip's question is, it's about how much it costs a band to cancel a tour. I live in Australia, says Philip, and was eagerly awaiting the Catfish and the Bottlemen tour, only to have it cancelled on the day of the Sydney show. And if you look elsewhere, the Dublin gig was cancelled just 10 minutes before doors opened. They have since cancelled all their Australian and American shows. How much would this have cost the band in venue deposits, ticketing costs, etc.? Thank you, Philip. This is one of those questions where there's quite a lot to it. So we'll try and break it down bit by bit. But the first thing, and we have to thank once again our secret agent who helped us out with this. By the way, if there are any promoters listening who would like to come on board with this pod anonymously, if you wish, we always have plenty of questions that we could do with a little bit of help with and guidance. But according to our secret agent, at this level, at Catfish level, both band and promoter will have some insurance in case of cancellations to offset the costs of having to cancel the show. Although, point 2 here, what you claim will depend on the reasons behind the cancellation. So why are the shows being called off? I think in Catfish's case, the Australian gigs were cancelled due to, I quote, a band member's illness, in which case I'm presuming they would almost certainly need a doctor's certificate, which sounds ridiculous, but insuring tours is like any sort of insurance. You have to prove to the insurance companies that you haven't just made your claim up. So you get a doctor out, or you go to a doctor. And I think that's probably why, every time you see a band pulling out of a gig for health reasons, they always have a line, don't they, which says something like, there's always a quote which says something like, doctors have advised them that they shouldn't attempt to sing for the next month or so, which I think is partly an explanation to fans, but I also suspect it's publicly telling the insurance company that the singer was definitely ill and was not just too hungover to get to the venue on time. And that's why they cancelled. So you can get some money through insurance if the insurers are satisfied with the situation. I then had an email exchange with a new recruit, our secret insurer, who we can at least call Tim, who added the bands hopefully have insurance so that any unrecoverable costs, of which there are likely to be lots, particularly when shows are cancelled at the last minute. So they should have insurance to cover these costs. They may also have bought a policy to protect against their fees and also their expected net profit from the tour. Lots of caveats here, though, says Tim, as the band will be required by the policy to try and mitigate the claim, which means if there's an option to reschedule the tour, then apparently insurers would much rather the dates were rescheduled and they would cover the costs. If the costs are cheaper of rescheduling the dates, they'll do that. They much prefer, rather than calling off the gigs entirely, rather than cancelling them, simply postponing them and putting them on at another time. The general intention of an insurance policy like this, says Tim, is on an indemnity basis. So it's to put the band back in the same position financially as if the tour had actually gone ahead. And then there's the specific part of the question on ticketing, which, I mean, technically, do you remember, Stuart, we talked about when bands get paid, and I was saying some bands will get money up front, or at least the agent will take money from the promoter and hold onto it. So if this has happened, then of course all the fees held by the live agent, they would all be returned to the promoter, who in turn returns ticket money to the customers. And then as for venues, Philip talking about venue deposits, I think there's a discussion here between the promoter and the venue. And I think some of this is down to when the gig was cancelled, because if the gig is cancelled 2 weeks in advance, then the venue possibly hasn't had to pay out as much. It hasn't employed the staff on the day. Its costs, the venue costs, will be less. I mean, obviously they'll be sitting there with an empty venue rather than one which is making money for them through venue hire and other avenues. So they will have incurred some costs, but not as much as if you'd basically had to go outside and tell the queue that this gig isn't happening. So venues would want some compensation, but again, it would depend probably on the relationship between the venue and the promoter, because if promoter A, so you've got a big promoter, an AEG or an SJM, say they use your venue quite a lot, then although you want something out of this, some compensation, you also won't want to damage your relationship with the promoter, because it's the promoter who puts the bands, on, who hires your venue on a regular basis. So if you don't have an in-house booker, promoters coming in and using your space is how you make money. So you won't want to, if you'll excuse me, piss them off by asking for too much. Does that make sense?
That does, yeah. I was reading an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about all this stuff as well. Now, look, I'm going to say right ahead, this is not about Catfish and the Bottlemen, because these are not the kind of cancellations that happen 10 minutes before a show goes on. So no. To be very clear for any lawyers listening. But there was a thing, and it's what you're saying, one thing that some insurance policies don't cover is low ticket sales. Mm-hmm. You can't, and that's maybe why you'd surmise in some other cases, when you hear about an artist reportedly having poor ticket sales, then they suddenly go down with a bug that keeps them out for the next few months. Yeah, that's why there's often people kind of going, "Oh yeah, really?" So there is, like you say, it's all about the caveats, isn't it? What does your insurance cover? What does it not cover? And if it doesn't cover what is making you cancel some gigs, how do you go forward? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, I'm fascinated by that whole area. I mean, let's say fascinated. How you calculate the risks of something like a tour, and what do you look at, and what's the formula?
Você ama ter mais flexibilidade para estudar? Use a sua nota do Enem e venha para Anhembi Morumbi. Aqui você pode escolher qual modalidade se adapta melhor à sua rotina: presencial, semipresencial ou ensino à distância. Tudo com uma metodologia inovadora e prática desde o início do curso. Descubra por que milhares de alunos amam estudar aqui. Acesse anhembi.br e garanta a sua vaga mesmo antes do Enem. Anhembi Morumbi. Aqui tudo acontece.
Well, here's a question for you then. Peter Felden, thank you, Peter, says, do you have any idea what the insurance costs might be for the Oasis tour? Surely the chances of them not going ahead, these gigs, are pretty high. Obviously the Oasis camp is very tight and there's very little leaking from it. But so this is partly speculation. I mean, expensive. according to our secret insurer. The costs are going to be quite high. I'll get to that in a second. But there were stories in the press, weren't there, that it had been written into the contract that they wouldn't get paid until they'd reached the end of various sections on the tour. I'm not sure if that's true, entirely 100% true, but it's certainly very plausible, isn't it? Because and for insurers as well, imagine taking out insurance with Oasis. I mean, if I was involved, I'd want some sort of clause that covered me against them splitting up after 4 shows, wouldn't you? I think.
Well, there's a history, isn't there, I suppose, with Oasis, that they have cancelled concerts and tours in the past. All the stuff that insurers will look at and say, right, what's the past evidence of this going smoothly? But then, I doubt this is how insurance think, but, this is almost too big to risk it falling apart in the same way. So there is that argument, I think, because, these gigs have to go ahead. It would be huge, not just an embarrassment, but also a huge financial hit if they went wrong. So
Tim was saying, just to finish off that point about how much it potentially costs, that the spend on insurance for this tour will be, and I think this is an understatement, will be high. But that's also, it's not just because of Oasis and the risk, I guess, but it's because the tour costs are going to be high and the guaranteed fees are high as well. But the brothers, they're not old, so they're not the Stones or Paul McCartney. They've got a recent history of touring, albeit not together. They've been out on the road, and they surely are keen to do the shows because they're going to, be iconic and will no doubt make decent money, says Tim. So there'll be some trepidation, I think Tim puts it, with amongst underwriters about their willingness to work together. But the policy, what it won't cover is, and this is the legal phrase that I love, so the insurance will cover some reasons for the tour or the dates not going ahead. One thing it will not cover, the policy won't cover disinclination to perform. Disinclination to perform. So the insurers are protected by this. But yeah, and some insurers will be interested in doing this deal, but it won't cover a hissy fit backstage at Wembley. I think that's the point. To be made.
The last time I saw Oasis, they were disinclined to perform, and they were on stage the whole set. So but I thought it was interesting. In October, there was actually a flurry of media reports talking about how the tour is being organised. And the gist was, It's about keeping Noel and Liam apart, except for when they're on stage. And they were saying they're going to be separate travel. They'll come together. I think the phrase was necessary promotional work and the gigs. Other than that, they'll be apart for much of this reunion. But I think and that's not just about insurance, is it? That's about making it happen and making I think when brothers realise what they need to do to kind of go on tour together, that's it. But it's you would imagine if you're involved, everything is going to be geared towards, right, what could possibly throw this off course? Let's mitigate against that. But the other thing, and this is where Tim might have more information, there's a lot of factors, aren't there, nothing to do with the artists playing. There's weather. Like the Merseyside Derby was called off because of Storm Darragh the other day, so concerts have to agree with that. There's kind of the terrorist threats. So the recent Taylor Swift gigs that got cancelled. Was it Vienna, I think, or Venice? Where they had to cancel gigs because of so there's all kinds of factors involved in any of these big gigs that will affect it as well, isn't it? It's not just about Oasis and their past history.
Thank you very much for that question, Peter. In fact, thank you very much for all your questions. We still have a few more in the pile, but keep them coming. This is the address if you'd like to send us a query about anything which baffles you about the finances of the music industry, or any monetary advice we might be able to pass on to you if you're an aspiring artist, or anything you want to know, really. The Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com is the address. The Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com. If you would like to support our work here, you can subscribe to the show in your podcast app. That really helps. You can leave us a review ditto, see above. You can tell your friends or just say nice things about us on social media. That would be lovely. Or if you are feeling generous, we now have a Patreon page where you can become a Price of Music fan or super fan for as little as £2 a month. Just go to patreon.com/thepriceofmusic. Patreon subscribers, I guess you will be hearing from us shortly, if you haven't already, about details of our first ever festive pop quiz. Come and join. Come spend some time with myself and Stuart online. I don't know who's going to be question master. Who's asking the question? Who's keeping the score?
Well, I mean, have you done a pop quiz before? Which was, I mean, I've been in them. I haven't run one, so I'm already at a disadvantage.
We did a pop quiz actually for the launch of. I did a compilation album with Demon Records, and we did a pop quiz as the launch, which was. Yeah, it was quite good fun. Yeah. I'm not saying that puts me in the necessarily in the prime position to be the host of our quiz, but should we flip a coin?
We'll have a fat dog round, a black crows round. It's going to be impossible for anyone apart from us to win. Have I ever told you my Norwich punk bands anecdote? I can't remember if I did or not.
No, go on. Have we got time? Yeah, go on. Tell us this better be good now, your Norwich punk bands anecdote.
When I was a student at UEA in Norwich, we went to enter a pop quiz at the Arts Centre there. And there was a round Norwich punk bands. And every time they played a clip of a band, one of the tables went, "Hooray!" And you realise that the entire rest of the room was Norwich punk bands. And we still won. We still managed to win.
Well, so they only remembered the band that they were in themselves.
That's it, yeah.
Typical musicians.
Narrow knowledge.
Anyway, we shall work all this out, I'm sure. For now, though, thank you very much once again for your support. Take care of yourselves, everybody. Bye for now.